Everyone ready? Okay. My time starts now. Hi, my name is Sophia, represent the Potomac Debate Academy. Me and my partner both agreed with the resolution saying that diplomacy is better at maintaining peace than military power will. Diplomacy means the profession, activity, or skill of managing international relations, typically by a country's representatives abroad. Contention 1, military power. Military power is in really bad shape. Currently, military power is in really bad shape. According to John Cooper, February 14, 2017, last week on Capitol Hill, several top U.S. military leaders across the armed forces or services presented a sobering case to Congress. U.S. military readiness is the lowest it has ever been in decades, leaving it unprepared to defend America's interests at home and abroad. In testimony before the Senate and the House Armed Service Committees, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Forces articulated pressing concerns with the state of their branches' readiness to respond to conflict overseas and attacks on the homeland. Hearing the highlighted substantial readiness and capacity issues within each of the Army services. Army. Of 58 total brigade combat teams, the Army's main combat building block, only 3 are considered ready for combat. Navy. The Navy's fleet is the smallest that has ever been in nearly 100 years. This makes ship repair harder to complete as those vessels are needed on the waterways. Marine Corps. 80% of the Marine aviation units do not have even the minimum number of aircraft they need for training and basic operations. Air Force. The Air Force is the smallest and in terms of many of its aircraft, the oldest it has ever been. The service had 8,600 aircraft in 1991, while today it only has 5,500, and those aircraft are an average of 27 years old. Fewer than half of those aircraft are prepared to take on and defeat our adversaries. The impact is that the troubling findings by the service echo those laid out by the Heritage Foundation in its 2017 Index of U.S. Military Strength, rated the Army as weak and the other 3 branches as marginal in terms of their ability to fight and win major conflicts. Navy, Marine, and Air Force pilots have all seen their flying hours substantially reduced because there's simply not enough money to fly sorties. And this had led pilots unable to maintain cockpit skills, which, like everything else, is a trophy without constant tuning and training. Therefore, 20 to 30 years later, in a world where our enemies have become stronger, more advanced, and aggressive, according to multiple reports just this week, about 2/3 of the Navy fighter/attack aircraft and more than half of the Marine Corps total aircraft fleet are unable to even get off the ground. Contention to arms race. Military power can increase the chance of having an arms race. Arms race is a competition between nations for superiority in the development and accumulations of weapons. For example, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, the U.S. used bombs to protect the people if Japan bombs again. What happened was that Russia saw how the U.S. and Japan both had bombs to protect themselves and produce their own. Only, of course, it's bound to be better than Japan and the U.S. because it can intimidate them to show that if they hurt them, they have better weapons to protect the country, and thus create an arms race. If arms race does happen, it can lead to war. It is said that arms race has a 331% of leading into war, which isn't what we want because the purpose is to protect the people and not hurt them. The impact of the situation is that arms race can happen, and with military power, it will only get worse. More and more countries will produce stronger weapons, which can lead to war. People can end up dying because of military power instead of having more protection from it. Therefore, military power will create an arms race instead of maintaining peace. Therefore, Judge, I strongly urge a pro-ballot. Thank you.
Okay, my time starts now. So your first contention stated that military power is in bad shape and the U.S.'s military power is low and that we're not ready for war, right?
Yeah.
Well, actually, we have very developed nuclear technology. Okay. How would you say that we're not prepared?
We're saying that these are not prepared, and nuclear technology, so you're saying that you want to hurt people with nuclear bombs and everything?
No, but I'm not saying that. But still, we do have nuclear technology, and we do have weapons.
What kind of weapons?
Guns, tanks. Wait, so what are you saying?
Okay, so we're saying that majority of the military power is right now military is in really bad shape.
How is it in bad shape? We've fought many wars, and for the most part, we have come out on the winning side.
We're saying right now, not in the past. We're saying right now that it's in
right
really
now.
bad shape.
The U.S. is actually a very feared country, and our nuclear technology acts as military deterrence, which actually supports our point, because it can scare other countries into submission because they're scared of what we can do with our military.
So what's your question?
So how can you say that our military power is in bad shape when it's actually our military deterrence that are scaring other countries?
Okay, so deterrence actually is on our side, which my partner was
No, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of military deterrence is the maintenance of military power for the purpose of discouraging attack, which is actually on our side.
Yes, but deterrence doesn't work all the time.
Well, in our case, the U.S.'s deterrence have stopped other countries from waging war with us so far. We're actually a very feared country.
Everybody ready? My time starts now. As Ulysses S. Grant said, although a soldier by profession, I have never felt any sort of fondness for war, and I have never advocated it except as a means of peace. Today, my partner and I will be debating the topic that military power better helps maintain peace and diplomacy. Contention 1. Military power as deterrence. According to NATO Review magazine, deterrence is a threat of force in order to discourage an opponent from taking an unwelcome action. This can be achieved through the threat of retaliation, that is, deterrence by punishment, or by denying the opponent's warnings, that is, deterrence by denial. One such type of deterrence is nuclear weapons. According to the Washington Post, Robert Spalding says that nuclear weapons are an instrument of peace. The United States won the Cold War by maintaining a credible nuclear force to stand against a stronger force. Missile-equipped submarines, the bombers, and the intercontinental ballistic missiles were the three key weapons that deterred the Soviets from attacking. These forces were at the forefront of the defense strategy during the Cold War. Robert Spalding also said that since 1945, 7 million to 10 million people have died in wars, but in only 2 world wars before nuclear weapons, 70 to 100 million people died. Nuclear weapons are scaring countries into submission. According to Brookings, Richard Bush, Vanda Falba Brown, Martin S. Indyk, Michael E. O'Hanlon, Stephen Pfeiffer, and Kenneth M. Pollack explained that when a country builds up powerful nuclear forces that could threaten any potential aggressor, there are many risks and high costs. According to the official NATO website, NATO's primary role is to protect peace and to guarantee the territorial integrity, political independence, and security of the member states. NATO conducts military exercises to demonstrate capability to deter and maintain peace effectively. As shown in the evidence above, military deterrence better helps maintain peace. Contention 2. Diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism. In fact, negotiating with the terrorists gives them a status. According to Daniel Greenfield, a Shulman journalism fellow at the Freedom Center at Front Page Mag, says that negotiating with terrorists doesn't work unless they intend to stop being terrorists. The reason that peace doesn't exist between Israel and the Palestine Authority is because it is run by a high-profile leaders of a terrorist group. As explained in Brookings by Richard N. Haas, it is always difficult to achieve peace with terrorist organizations or head of states who are authoritarian or dictators. For example, even after trying diplomacy for 6 months, it took Operation Desert Storm, a use of military action, to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. The United States also unsuccessfully tried to use diplomacy with the Taliban to cut ties with al-Qaeda. According to the American Enterprise Institute, efforts to negotiate with the Taliban did not just fail, they also strengthened the terrorist group and further destabilized Afghanistan. Between 1994 and 2001, the Taliban used diplomacy as an instrument to further its military agenda. According to the Institute of Economics and Peace, the number of deaths resulting from terrorism increased by 80% in 2014 compared to the prior year. Since the beginning of the 21st century, there has been over a 9-fold increase in the number of deaths from terrorism. This is the world we live in today, where terrorism is a global threat and diplomacy cannot maintain peace. Based on the evidence above, we strongly urge a calm ballot.
Time starts now. So when you said that country build weapons and the risk and high cost, can you elaborate that?
Okay, so I was saying that if one country builds up powerful nuclear forces, then another country won't want to like go to a war with them because they know that there will be like high risks for them and high costs.
Yes, but nuclear threat is so high. They treat 1% as if it's going to happen 100%. So how would you know that they're not going to create weapons or create a shield that will help them?
Okay, so there's something called mass assured destruction. Mutual assured destruction, sorry. And that's when if one country starts building nuclear weapons and another country does, they know that if one country goes and like bombs another country, that country's just gonna come back and bomb them. They're not just gonna wait. So it's just gonna keep on going back. And then they know that both of the countries will be like in ruins, so.
Exactly, so that wouldn't go at our point saying that diplomacy would be better.
What's your question?
Okay, so I was just asking you to elaborate on it. So also, I'm going to ask you another one. Wouldn't that basically go into our side saying it's going to create an arms race and everything? Because you're saying that...
Okay, we're gonna talk about that in the tax speech, but arms race, it's mutual assured destruction. And you're kind of using deterrence there, and it's called military deterrence because according to the NATO Review magazine, the definition of deterrence is the threat of force in order to discourage an opponent from taking an unwelcome action. Diplomacy is not using force.
Yes, but we have evidence that deterrence doesn't work all the time.
But it works sometimes. Diplomacy doesn't work all the time, does it?
Exactly. So then, but we're saying that diplomacy is better than deterrence and military power in general.
How is that so? Because mutual assured destruction will make sure that like they won't be
Are you saying that everyone in the world thinks exactly what you're thinking right now?
No.
So, yeah. So there's some people who would still continue.
Time's up.
Debate, our opponents have stated two different contentions. Our opponent's first contention was that military power is in bad shape. During cross-examination, we asked the other team how they could say that the U.S.'s military power is in bad shape when it is our weapons and power, nuclear stuff and etc., that scares other countries into submission through military deterrence. Our opponent's second contention was that arms race can lead into war. We respond to this by providing the example of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the arms race did not lead to war. We didn't understand their second contention well because it was unclear. Also, going back to the topic of mutually assured destruction, two countries will keep on bombing each other until there is complete destruction. How does this support their point? Our opponents have failed to provide sufficient contentions during the debate. Thus, we have succeeded in attacking their case.
Okay, ready? Time starts now. So we stated that military power is failing in our first contention. So if you still believe it is better, how will you fix it?
Believe what is better?
Military power.
Fix what?
Military power.
So if we believe military power, how will we fix it? If we believe military power is better, we don't need to fix it.
Well, you do, because in our first contention...
Wait, what do you mean fix? Like, that's an opinion.
Like, what will you do to improve it?
Why would we need to improve? It's an
because
opinion.
Because in our first contention, we stated that...
Okay, wait, what's your question? I don't really understand it.
We already stated that in the military power is failing in our first contention,
yeah.
Correct? So if you believe it's better, how will you improve it?
We believe it's better. We believe that we don't need to improve it because the U.S. already has a sufficient military force. It's because of our military deterrence that many countries are scared of us. We are a first world country.
Yes, but in our first contention, we stated that the Army
You're
and the Navy...
You're asking me to support your first contention. You asked me how would I fix it if the U.S. doesn't have a good military force. What we're saying is that the U.S. does have a good military force and that we don't need to fix it. So I don't understand how you can ask me to fix that. Next question, please.
Well, can I...
Yeah, go ahead.
So we stated in our first contention that the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force are all going down.
Well, other countries might not necessarily know that, and according to what's happening today, our country's military deterrence has been proving us to be a strong country.
But the thing is, okay, so we're saying that... Is everyone ready? Okay. My time starts now. So my opponent said something about the nuclear attacks, but the thing is, military power is causing it. And also, deterrence is on the pro side because according to NATO.int, history abounds with examples of deterrence failing despite a balance of forces and even cases in which the weaker side attacks the stronger. The military leadership of Imperial Japan, for example, was fully aware of U.S. military superiority. For example, but if a surprise attack on the Pearl Harbor naval base would destroy a major part of the U.S. Pacific Fleet while paralyzing Washington politically, Japan might stand a chance of prevailing. In 1973, Syria and Egypt attacked the military superior Israel not because they hoped to win, but because they wanted to reestablish the political doubt they had lost after Israel had defeated them in 1967's Six-Day War. Israel had not seen the attack coming. Why would two military inferior countries even think of attacking an opponent that was certain to victory? This self-assuredness led Israel to ignore the many warning signals about a pending attack. As a result, the rapidly advancing armies of Egypt and Syria were initially much more successful than expected. Military superiority had not ensured deterrence. And now I will repeat our second contention, which is arms race. So military power can increase the chance of having an arms race because arms race is a competition between nations for superiority in development and accumulation of weapons. For example, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, the U.S. created bombs to also protect their people if Japan bombs again. What happened was that Russia saw how the U.S. and Japan both have bombs to protect themselves, and so they produced their own. Only, of course, it was bound to be better than Japan's and the U.S. because it can intimidate them to show that if they try to hurt them, they have better weapons to protect their country. This created an arms race. Military power is not better at maintaining peace because it is causing more trouble and problems for a country. Diplomacy won't create an arms race because you are negotiating and compromising what you and the other person wants. If an arms race does happen, it can lead to war. It's stated in New York Times, it stated that arms race has a 331% chance of leading into war, which isn't what we want because the purpose is to protect people, not to hurt them. The impact of the situation is that arms race can happen, and with military power, it will get worse. And more countries will produce stronger weapons, which can also lead to war. People will end up dying because of military power and having more protection from it. So therefore, military power will create an arms race instead of maintaining peace. And therefore, Judge, I strongly urge a pro ballot. Thank you.
It's cross-sex elimination, right?
I'll take 30.
Everybody ready?
Wait. Yeah.
Okay. My time starts now. How did you attack our first contention again? Which was military deterrence.
So we stated that. Do you want the card?
No,
or?
it's okay. Just like.
Okay. So we stated that history abounds with example of deterrence failing despite a balance of forces and even cases in which weaker side attack the stronger. Do you want me to?
No, it's okay. So are you aware that the Cuban Missile Crisis was just like this big thing about using deterrence? Because when someone started building
revolutionary, the Cuban revolution.
No, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Okay.
So one country started building nuclear weapons, the other country did, and then it kept on going. But none of them attacked because if one of them attacked, they knew that the other person attacked. So that didn't lead to war. So do you have any examples where military deterrence did lead to war?
Do you want us to?
No, just give me an example why military deterrence led to war, because that's how you said.
Okay, my partner will say that in.
Okay. So you said that the arms race intimidates people.
Yeah.
And so arms race and military deterrence go hand in hand because one country's building up something, the other country's building up something, but they're not going to use it because it's like mutual assured destruction, MAD. Everybody knows that it's just going to, if one country attacks, the other country will attack, and it's both of them are going to get destroyed.
But we were saying how it was like the Pearl Harbor situation where Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, but U.S. created weapons, and Russia saw.
Yeah, because we weren't actually involved in the war. So Japan Japan
Bombed Pearl Harbor.
bombed Pearl Harbor, and then we bombed Japan.
Okay.
So that it actually happened.
But then Russia, they created weapons of their own, and they made it
Do
more.
you know why Japan
made it
actually
more-
left the war?
Why?
Because it wasn't because they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. It was because
Starts now. So we're not saying that deterrence leads to war. We're saying that deterrence doesn't work. We're saying that you're saying how deterrence work by forcing people into doing going to the diplomacy and everything, helping us. But we're saying that deterrence doesn't work, and we clearly stated in our rebuttal that that there are some flaws and that history abounds with examples of deterrence failing despite a balance of force in even cases, which the weaker side attacked the stronger side. So it doesn't work, and it's also creating. And you guys also said that the U.S. military power is great. We have nukes, we have guns, we have bombs. But we can't just rely on nukes, guns, and bombs. We also need our Marine Air Forces and Navy. We can't just ignore them. They are failing, and you don't have statistics that those parts aren't failing. You're saying that nuclear weapons and bombs and guns are increasing, but we still need those. Those are still important to the U.S. military power. So we also went on that point. And you could. And for arms race, we clearly stated that from a PDF said that arms race created 331% of leading into war. You're saying how the Cuban Missile Crisis, one person created nuclear war and the nuclear weapons, and the other one created nuclear weapons, and they didn't attack. But we're saying that just because that happened, you didn't tell us whether or not there were also other countries who saw and created more weapons to make sure that if they do attack their country, they wouldn't die and their people wouldn't die. Diplomacy would be better because you're just negotiating. You're not creating more weapons. You're not harming the economy. You're just negotiating with the other country. Therefore, you should vote for the pro side of this debate. Thank you.
starts now. My opponent attacked our first contention by saying that military deterrence doesn't work, but we gave a clear example using the Cuban Missile Crisis. If we look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, one country started building up nuclear weapons, and the other country started building up nuclear weapons. And then a war didn't actually happen. Like, military deterrence worked there, because they knew if one country fired, the other country would fire, and it would lead into a complete disaster. And our opponents didn't even attack our second contention. Our second contention is very important. It states that terrorist groups, diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism. Terrorism is it's a very important factor. This is why we urge a con ballot.
Okay, my time starts now. So my opponents dropped on the point where we said how deterrence was better. They only gave one example, but we gave more than one example, so therefore we went on that point. And they also dropped on our 331% chance of leading into war, and they dropped on our Air Force and etc. The part where we said how, in our first contention, that the Air Force, Marine, Army, there are 58 total brigade teams, and only 3 are considered ready for combat. The Navy's fleet is the smallest it has been in 100 years. This makes ship repairs harder to complete as those vessels are needed on the waterways. Marine Corps, 80% of marine aviation units do not even have the minimum number of aircraft they need for training and basic operations. Air Force, the Air Force is the smallest and in terms of many of its aircraft, oldest it has ever been. The service had 8,600 aircraft in 1991, while today it only has 5,500. And those aircraft are an average of 27 years old. Worse, fewer than half of those aircraft are prepared to take on and defeat our adversaries. Also, their point on U.S. military power is better. They can't just rely on guns and nukes completely ignore that our point that Marines, Navies, Air Force, and etc. are failing, and they said that nukes are good. So therefore, Judge, I strongly urge a pro ballot. Thank you.
Okay. My time starts now. In the end, we have won the debate because we have provided a viable argument that has been backed up with supporting evidence from credible sources. Our first contention stated that hard power as military deterrence has prevented conflict in the past. During the debate, our opponent stated that military power is in bad shape. We responded to this argument by saying that the U.S. actually has good weapons that they use in military deterrence. Our second contention stated that diplomacy doesn't work when it comes to terrorism. During the debate, our opponent stated that arms race can lead to war. We responded to this argument by saying that military power does not always lead to arms race. They said arms race leads to war. How does this pertain to their side? Furthermore, they failed to attack our second contention completely. In fact, their attack speech was almost entirely a defense speech. Our second contention was very important, and it stated that diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism. Furthermore, the other team kept focusing on the U.S. instead of addressing all the nations of the world. Ultimately, we were able to defend both of our statements adequately and appropriately. Our contentions made sense and supported our thesis statement well. Thus, the con team has won the debate.
Nice job.